So this is just a brief excerpt from The Deserters. This is the latest novel by Mathias Enard. Um, and there's actually two narratives. It starts out with a soldier deserting from an unknown war. And then the other narrative takes place in Berlin on a riverboat during a conference about a fictional mathematician named Paul Heudeber. And the narrator is the daughter of that mathematician, who is a mathematical historian or historian of mathematics. Um, so that's the section I'll read from now. It's chapter 18. Nasir al-Tusi, the great 13th century Persian scholar, is not only a great philosopher, a brilliant mathematician, and a physicist equal to Galileo, but also a first-rate writer. We owe him a terrifying story about the destruction of Baghdad in 1258 by the Mongol armies of Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu Khan, under whom Tusi was a government minister. Tusi witnessed the destruction of Baghdad from the camp of the destroyers, the camp of those who piled up heads to make immense pyramids from them, who killed even the dogs, even the birds. It was necessary that nothing and no one survive. The perfect silence of victory had to reign over all. Tusi had spent half his life in a fortress hidden in the folds of the Alborz range in Kuhastan, a fortress named Alamut, which was the citadel of the assassins, that Ismaili sect, as Orientalists called it. I remember the Nagel Guide in Iran, published in 1967, said it took 4 to 5 days on horseback from the city of Ghazvin to climb up the valley of Shah Rud, the river of the king, and reach the castles of the Nizarite Shiites, who were the masters of the region between the 10th and 13th centuries, until the arrival of those Mongols whose administration Tusi joined. It is probable that his reputation as a scholar had already reached Hulagu and his advisors. The head of the Mongol armies knew that in the citadel of the Old Man of the Mountain there was the greatest scholar of all time, the one who could decipher the movement of the stars in the heavens. Although no one really knew how or why, the scholar, the philosopher, the mathematician, the one who would become the greatest astronomer of his time, Nasiruddin Tusi, joined the Mongol armies. Tusi accompanied the Mongols to the capital of the Abbasid caliphs as far as Baghdad. Baghdad of the House of Wisdom and the libraries, Baghdad of the 1001 Nights, Baghdad of thought, of poetry, of knowledge and poetry, Baghdad which had been the beacon of the world for 500 years and was lost, destroyed by Hulagu's Mongols at the beginning of February 1258. How many died in the massacres that followed the fall? All, that is Nasiruddin's reply. All died, the scholars and the illiterate, the wealthy, the poor, the powerful, the beggars, the women, the men, the slaves and the Muslims. All were killed, their bodies piled up, and they even killed with arrows the crows and carrion feeders that approached the corpses. Then Tusi went on his way without shedding a tear, apparently, for the lives that had been lost, or for the science that was forever destroyed, as if he was certain it would be rebuilt, as if it was up to the scholars to rebuild. The great Sadi of Shiraz sings the threnody of Baghdad and the Caliph. The sky itself weeps blood on the kingdom of Mustasim, last commander of the believers. I was thinking about the fall of Baghdad on the afternoon and evening of September 11th, 2001, opposite Peacock Island in Vansi, in a kind of sad reverie, my head full of images of destruction in New York, unaware, obviously, that Baghdad would once again, a few years later, be destroyed. The riverboat, the Beethoven, wasn't swaying any more than it had that morning during the conference's first session, solidly moored to the dock. The assembly room had slowly emptied in a sort of decay, a withering away. At 6:30 p.m., we had decided to cancel what remained of the Paul Heudeber days. My mother was shocked, terrified by what she saw on TV. She was at a loss. She trailed after Lyndon Pauly in infernal concentric circles. Pauly, whose daughter worked as an actuary in an office at the World Trade Center, was vainly trying to phone New York, to find out, to understand, to talk to his wife, to someone, to move forward his return plane ticket. And all these tasks came up against walls, and one after the other turned out to be absolutely pointless. The American sky was completely closed to air traffic, and all flights canceled. Polly ended up taking one of the first flights that went to the United States just 3 days later from Frankfurt, after spending in vain 48 hours at the airport hotel. The night kept falling. The conference's afternoon session had been interrupted during the coffee break after a doctoral student had presented his results having to do with the calculation of the Hausdorff dimension for the Heudeber function and its consequences. We didn't know it, but the discussions would never resume. To escape the agitation, the objectless tension, we were thousands of kilometers away from the site of the catastrophe, and yet we were acting as if the towers were there next to us, as if we too were crushed under the rubble of astonishment. I climbed up to the deck. It was a beautiful late summer afternoon. The Havel was smooth and opaque, veering between watery green and silver reflections. It had rained all day, and now the sun was appearing. I thought about our cruise of the day before. The world had changed, lives had been lost, as they are every day, but above all, a part of our faith had collapsed with the towers. Our faith in a kind of peace, of reparation, was crumbling away. Already during the previous decade, the wars in Yugoslavia had tinged with red the joy of the fall of the wall. Europe had averted its eyes. The Balkans are violent lands peopled with savages, was how people thought. Paul would have shouted that only communism and fraternity could save mankind from its own fury. I don't know anything about that. I was leaning on the rail on the lakeside. The water had a smell, a plant-like smell. Maybe Paul and Tusi were right. It was better to take refuge in the worlds of stars and mathematics. Stars, love, bodies, rings, ideals, that whole hodgepodge of things so profoundly human that it cannot collapse, for it remains in us, in the imaginal world. I think I'll stop there. Thank you so much.